Like, there's no such thing as like this like clean field, right? There's birds, there's bugs, there's deer, there's mice, there's tractors, there's actual dirt in the field. And so there's like been this like commercialization of food that kind of gets it where there's like this mythical belief that the food comes in like clean and untouched and it's just magically delicious. And except the corporate like agricultural people, like they dust poison on there because they hate people and want to kill them. It's like you get all these like weird like mythologies of what's actually going on in food, but most of what you get you could like do in your backyard.
Welcome to the SGS Food Operations Series. I'm Jim White, president of Incesso for Food and an SGS partner. We help food manufacturers and distributors solve the food traceability challenge and achieve FSMA 204 compliance while accelerating digitalization across their operations. This series is where we spotlight food industry leaders who are driving operational excellence, managing complex supply chains, and navigating the evolving landscape of food safety and transparency. Today, I'm joined by Alex Allen, COO of James Skinner Baking Company, a leading bakery manufacturer specializing in sweet baked goods for grocery chains from across the country. Alex, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jim. Happy to be here.
So, I guess first question is, can you share a bit about James Skinner Baking Company's story and what inspired your focus on sweet bakery products for the grocery retail market?
Yeah, the Skinner family, the heritages they started with pasta. So they had a long stint of pasta plants. They had the largest pasta plant in the world at one point. And that was a couple generations earlier. And then at some point they sold their pasta business. And one of the, I think his third generation kids decided, he still wanted to do business and decided to get into bakery. And so started a bakery and really focused on high quality laminated breads, which for people who aren't familiar, if you think of like your sandwich bread or something like that, you make dough, you put it in a pan and just sort of bake it. In a laminated bread, you take your dough and then you layer in butter or margarine or fillings or something like that. And then you fold that over and over and over again so that the filling is layered in there. And so then you have all these twists and layers and folds within the bread structure itself. So when it bakes, you get a much more pleasant eating experience than if you just took butter and threw it into the mixer and just blended it all together.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
so if you did that, all of those butter fats would sort of like melt and you would just have like a greasy loaf of bread. So instead you make the dough, you cool the dough down and then you fold it in and you keep it all cool and then you let it proof and retard and develop flavor. And so then when you bake that and add cheese and fruit fillings, you get a really tasty piece of a much more enjoyable eating experience than you would get with the same ingredients just thrown into a blender.
Yeah, awesome. So, what makes James Skinner stand out in today's competitive bakery manufacturing landscape? What do grocery chain partners value most about working with you guys?
Definitely our ingredient quality. So a lot of people in this space have been shortchanging that. Um, our processes are still essentially like handmade pastry products at scale. So whereas a lot of places have tried to cut labor and have tried to cut ingredient costs, and they are just sort of extruding simple doughs and then just throwing some filling on top and saying, the customer won't notice. Well, the customers do notice. And so having that layered laminated bread that actually does melt in your mouth and taste so much better, that helps us stand out. And versus when you make it with a machine, your product has to be more consistently pliable and machinable. And so then they change the recipe so that the dough works with the machine making the bread and so you give up bread quality, ingredient quality, and to get the product on the shelf cheaper.
So they're optimizing it for the process, not for the taste.
Yeah. And so
Yeah, got
we're
it.
like, if, the corner bakery made by hand, like we're essentially doing that and then freezing it and sending it to national chains.
So, walk me through your supply chain. Like, who are you buying from, and who are you selling to, and how do you manage those supplier relationships at scale?
Our biggest ingredient is flour. And then after that, our dairy products, cheese, cream cheese, butter, shortening, eggs, pretty traditional bakery stuff. And then we also have fruit fillings and things like blueberries and different jellies and chocolate chips, that kind of stuff. Most of I don't think we're buying anything that's a custom ingredient for us other than maybe like packaging, but because we're doing a lot of stuff from scratch. So we're buying a lot of like truly raw materials that we then blend up together. So like our cheese Danish filling, we're buying cream cheese and eggs and flavors and fruits and blending those fillings.
So, the whole your supply partners, is there a certain process that you guys go through to qualify them, that sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah, it's a mix of quality of ingredients. A lot of it's geographic. Are they nearby? Especially when we're talking eggs and cream cheeses and things like that, they are shorter shelf life. And then flour is heavy and low cost, so you need to be close to the supplier on that one. And then we also go through quite a bit of flour, and we don't have unlimited bin space, so we need to be close enough that we can coordinate directly with the mill and say, hey, we're running this product tomorrow. We're gonna need the load at 2 p.m. And then something happens, we can adjust a little bit, an hour or two, because it's coming in bulk. And then, so we have some relationships that we've had for a long time, and then we have some relationships that are a little bit competitive. We'll go out and say, hey, we're looking for fruit fillings. What do you have? And do different trials and make sure the flavor and the texture and stuff works the way we need to in our blends. And then it's a little bit on price. And then there's always the risk review of who's the supplier, or how are they getting their raw ingredients, what's the track record, do they have all those certifications we need, kosher, or the different allergens, or the different things we might need. And then we use some tracing software to sort of keep track of all that documentation and make sure we get all of the COAs and that kind of stuff.
Do you feel like you have good transparency back to your supply chain with regard to, like, not just where their stuff's, but like where they're buying their stuff from? You have good visibility to that?
Yes and no. I grew up on a farm, and then in my career, I've worked for almost all of our suppliers that we have at James Skinner, one way or the other. So I like have a pretty good understanding of the whole supply chain of food in America, and I've had other conversations with like FDA, not necessarily here, but like different FDA and USDA people. 50 years ago, I think there was people had a little bit more of a reality of what's going on, but food has grown out in nature. It's grown in the wild, right? Like there's no such
Right,
thing
right.
as like this like clean field, right? There's birds, there's bugs, there's deer, there's mice, there's tractors, there's actual dirt in the field. And so there's like been this like commercialization of food that kind of gets it where there's like this mythical belief that the food comes in like clean and untouched and it's just magically delicious. And except
Right.
the corporate like agricultural people, they dust poison on there because they hate people and want to kill them. It's like you get all these like weird like mythologies of what's actually going on in food, but most of what you get you could like do in your backyard if you had enough like area, and you could grow your own food and grain and animals and that kind of stuff. And it's all messy business, and we like to pretend that it like is in this package and is super healthy, but like there's mother nature out there, and then there's warehousing, and then there's trucking, and then there's like all these handoffs. And so like I've had conversations with USDA, no, it was the FDA, and this was about uh like different allergen controls, and the field people are very aware that um like life happens and exists and is near each other, and that there's no such thing as like an independent supply chain. Maybe if you're on an island, like trucks and mechanics and trains and grain elevators, and like there are some like there's places in the country where like they wall it off and say, here, we are going to grow these organic oats, and they only touch our equipment, and they go into our factory, and they're 100% our own. But most
Right.
supply chains are kind of messy, and they touch each other and move around. And so the whole like allergen free kind of thought process and the way that those risks and those things are done are not necessarily helping people be safer.
Mhm.
They've put the way the labeling laws and that kind of stuff works. But pretty much any chocolate that you get you should consider it to have a milk allergen, just by how like entire chocolate supply chain goes to a factory that has milk in it, right? But some for whatever will try to say they don't have milk in them, And then somebody will go test it and they find milk and protein in there. And, I've been stuck in between the conversation with the FDA person who was in the field and goes, yeah, we know pipes, tanks, trucks,
Mhm.
equipment.
Right.
Nobody is running 100% dairy-free milk. Dark chocolate has milk chocolate in it. Like somewhere in the supply chain, there's a risk of milk. Pretty much all milk should be labeled, or all chocolate should be labeled as a milk allergen. The guy sitting in Washington, D.C., replies back and says, look, if the manufacturers are too lazy to properly clean their equipment and stop being greedy corporate people, this is unacceptable. Hey, we're trying to keep people with a milk allergen from being sick, right? It would be simpler if they understood the risk, right? And so then some suppliers are trying to say like, well, we're going to put milk on all chocolate as an ingredient, even if the chocolate supplier isn't saying there's milk on there. And so some of the chocolate suppliers will just they'll do the same thing. They'll say there's milk in all of our chocolate. But whether we meant to
Mhm.
put it in there or not, there's milk in all of our chocolate. And the FDA says, well, you have to mean to put it in there. Like you can't say it's an ingredient if you didn't mean to put it in there. So then they want to put it on the allergens and they say you can't put it on the allergens because you didn't mean to put it in there. And so like there's this catch-22 between the paperwork people and then hey, we're trying to prevent people from being sick.
Mhm.
And I think it would be simpler if they would fix those stupid laws, like up and down the chain, right? Like some products should just say, here's the risks these things have in them. I used to be in flour milling and, one of our customers, uh, had soybean allergens pop up. And they said, "Well, why are you putting soybeans in your flour?" And we said, "We don't put soybeans in our flour, but grain is grown in America in a field, and so is soybeans." And so we had a deep dive into all of our grain, and we found that there like was a drought somewhere, and so there was these tiny soybean seeds that were about the same size as wheat seeds that year. So throughout the rail car, elevator, boats, trucks system that moves grain, these little soybeans were ending up in wheat. And the way that we try to clean our wheat coming out of this is a screen, right? So if it's smaller than a wheat seed, it falls through. If it's bigger than a wheat seed, it goes to the dumpster. And if it's the same size as a wheat seed, it's in your flour. And so when a
Exactly.
soybean is the same size as a wheat seed, it was in the flour. And yeah, so that was a kind of a long-winded way to say like, yes, on paperwork, it's hard enough to have the paperwork in order, and then there's this whole reality of wildlife and trucking that happens in the background that also has to be kind of managed and understood and taken care of.
So that kind of leads to the next question, which I think is closely related. You covered some of it, but as you work with major grocery chains, what are you seeing in terms of expectations around food safety, transparency, supply chain visibility, and has that changed recently?
Yeah, I think there's two kind of competing forces. Is one, the big internet of everything is sort of there's an expectation that documents and data is shared and is accurate and flows through correctly. Some of the big food players, that have the resources to make it all work, have gotten their systems to work and have been doing it long enough that it's sort of become the industry standard. And then you go into some smaller places that have been, family ran forever, like Jay Skinner, and in the back office, everything's still manual. We put our paperwork together, we draft our COAs, we send them by email. There's a person doing it. Or some of the bigger companies, like the lab automatically talks to SAP and SAP converts it into a COA and sends it, with the ASN paperwork, and it just sort of all flows automatically. So there's that piece, but then there's also the continued downstream effects of the Food Safety Modernization Act. The last piece that they've been fighting over, which I'm probably going to say it wrong, is the 204
Assessment tool for
section, right? The traceability of the high risk foods and the way the law is written. Um, it's been like what 8 or 10 years since that law was written, and they still haven't figured out how to get the technical hurdle taken care of to try to get the traceability that law is trying to ask for.
Mhm.
But there are entities that are getting close to it, and so that also is driving sort of the supply chains and expectations of traceability in a different way than traditionally. So sort of forcing everybody to up their game.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of tension that there's some guys racing ahead or getting ahead and being able to accomplish something that hasn't been on the radar screen for especially folks maybe a little bit less dependent on digital solutions.
Yeah. And it has real world effects too, right? So,
Right.
like, there are people out there who are making nut butters in, let's say, very far removed from the fields. They're making nut butters like in, let's just say, Saginaw, Michigan. I don't know if anybody's there, but we'll just like way out in the middle of nowhere. There's no
Right, right.
peanuts growing nearby. There's no almonds growing nearby, right? So they're buying nuts from suppliers all over, and then they're blending them, and then doing sensory and stuff to try to get their flavor profiles of the products they want, while also controlling costs, which is no big deal. You keep track of your lot codes, but with the way the new law works, having to tie out every single lot code to every single lot code all the way up your supply chain, the paperwork of trying to mix and blend to get those flavor profiles that you want
Mhm.
now becomes burdensome. Now you got to go, well, we only want to have one lot code in our nut blends at a time. Well, what does that mean? That means you have to pick like a supplier who makes a big enough lot that covers your lot. You have to then work really hard on the nut quality to match your butter quality, right? Because some nuts are starchier, some are fatter. So if you're trying to get this flavor blend that you've had forever where you're blending this, well, based on paperwork, you might not be able to blend that anymore. Same is true for things like meats and, or maybe you're blending chicken and beef and you're making and pork and making these flavorful like meat products, just because of this traceability law, maybe you don't do that business anymore.
Yeah, so it's kind of like your core proposition, which is my competitors are optimizing the process for um they're optimizing the food for the process, not the food for the taste, and it's kind of the
They're
same
optimizing
problem.
the food for the law, which is even the worst thing, right? Because consumers don't care about the law. They care about what tastes good and what the price is, and you're optimized for something that the consumer doesn't even care about.
Okay, interesting. So, uh, how do you currently track ingredients and products through your manufacturing process out to your retail customers? And do you have some systems in place for that?
Yeah, we have a basic ERP with a warehouse management system. So when it comes in, we record the lot code, tie it to the ingredients, and then that's tied to a storage location. And then our ERP, we generate production orders, which tells you what ingredients to use, and then as it gets used, that gets tied to it. So we track all of the lot products and lot codes in our essentially our warehousing ERP system.
Okay.
But then all of our paperwork is tracked in a separate system. So then it's a manual tie out between the two.
Okay. So there's systems that enable it, but there's also some manual tasks that have to take place to,
Yeah.
get everything to tie off and get that. What about the data sharing requirements of the new rule? Have you guys thought much about that?
Yes and no. We're not in like the high risk first wave for most of our products, so it's less critical for Jay Skinner than it would be for the ones who are in those high risk industries like the nut butters or the meats. So I'm thinking about it. Or sales guys and those teams that they would have no idea what we're talking about. Whereas when I was in the candy space, their buyers were briefing the sales team on, hey, this is coming. You have to hit this requirement or I can't buy from you.
Right.
The bakery buyers don't. Baked goods go through an oven, which is a nice kill step. So we're a lot lower risk than.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's been your biggest operational challenge when it comes to managing supplier data, product tracking, or responding to customer requests for supply chain information?
The biggest challenge is always that it's not all in the same system. So the purchasing team they're just looking at contracts and having enough coverage and they're tracking purchase orders and those sorts of things. And then the QA team is tracking what's received. And then the R&D team is tracking their different testing and mixes. So each team has a different way that they're tracking it. And then the production warehousing team has a different way they're tracking it. So trying to get everybody to use the same tool can be tricky because not every tool works in each of those areas or both. Getting tools that like talk to each other and have the features that each area might be using is
Right.
we're building the use case of why we need to do that. Coming in with new owners and new eyes. The J Skinner family had file cabinets and paperwork, and it's just not great, right? Like a recall. If you have to go pull pallets of paperwork out of a warehouse for a recall, you've already added several hours of time.
Yeah. So you guys are working through kind of an operational reset as a result of some new ownership.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
Yeah, no, I think those are two fundamental, like, foundational like, there's all people behaviors and getting our paperwork processes optimized and cleaned up and adding digital where we can, but then looking at the ERP and then our QMS, supplier management, all of those programs, kind of figure out what ERP you're gonna use, and then you go find tools that talk to that ERP and connect to it and make it all
Right.
flow and work better.
So you already mentioned FSMA 204 and the FDA's food traceability rule. Has anyone in your customer base mentioned requirements around traceability for products on the food traceability list, like eggs or that sort of thing?
Not our receiving customers, because all of our products are baked goods, so we're not in one of the high risk classes. Some of our inbound stuff would be, but because we're using those as ingredients and then processing and baking them.
So, for example, there are some customers like Kroger, Walmart, and Albertson have all said, even if it's not on the food traceability list, I expect it to come in with FSMA 204. So, but you haven't seen that from your customer base yet.
I haven't personally here at J Skinner so far. I know I've seen it in my previous employers. We were starting to see that from our customers. There was a big push like February, April timeframe. I think they were all coming out with it really hard and saying, hey, by next year we want it for everybody. And
Right.
then the FDA punted their rollout requirement date, and then everybody just sort of like kind of said, well, we still want you to do it, but it's not a hard requirement right now. It's a soft requirement. So I think everybody was gearing up for it, and then everybody just sort of walked away when the feds punted again.
Yeah, they pushed it out by 30 months, and a lot of people said, "Oh, well, we got a lot of time. Let's rethink everything."
Yeah. Yeah, the world of data is changing so fast on that kind of stuff that 30 months right now is huge. Like AI didn't exist 30 months ago. Now it's all everybody talks about. Well, in 30 months, it might actually be useful.
Right.
Right now it's just a headline. 30 months, it might actually help with the data processing and storage and connecting apps and that kind of stuff.
Right, right. Yeah, that's true. But like you said, there's a lot of human stuff in the middle, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, one of the things in a lot of system stuff is you'll see that there's, human latency is actually a bigger factor. There's just getting meetings with the right people can take months, that sort of thing. So if you had a magic wand, what's the one thing you change in your operations right now to make managing compliance, traceability, or customer requirements easier?
I would make a bunch of FDA people come and try to run a food plant for a few days and have them, I would propose you like they would add a second set of rules. Like, here's the rules to be fully compliant with all of our current nutritional stuff right now. Here's a simplified label rule that you could like voluntarily sign up for.
Mhm.
And we used to be able to just call it vegetable oil. And then it became, well, you have to say if it's sunflower or soybean or, you had to say what type of vegetable oil. Well, then
Uh-huh.
supply chains went crazy. And what was an interchangeable ingredient became, well, it's not interchangeable because we specified. Well, then everybody said, well, we can't afford to specify because then I'm locked into corn oil and soybean oil might be cheaper next year. So now they write vegetable oil, soybean slash corn slash, like these terms just get like ridiculously long. And then, especially like us, where you've got a multi-layered product, right? We're making dough and we're making filling, and then we have fruit filling, and then we have glazing over the top. Your ingredient deck just becomes like long. Like, here's the dough and those ingredients. Here's the fruit flavor and those ingredients. And like, does it really help the consumer to know, is it corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, sugar, invert sugar? Like, it's all glucose and fructose. Like, it's just your stomach doesn't care. So at some point the labeling world has gotten insane. Is vegetable oil or is it animal oil? Like, and let the consumer decide, right? Like, have a option where you can be a simplified label that kind of goes back to the old ways where you just say it's vegetable oil and it could be one of these. or it's a sweetener, and it could be
Mhm.
sugar, it could be corn syrup, it could be whatever, and sort of unleash the supply chain a little bit where, we'll have a supplier call and say, "Hey, uh, like this is happening right now. There was an aluminum plant that had a fire, and everybody using aluminum in their baking pans is now on shortage. Well, on our packaging, we have recycling instructions for aluminum pans. Well, the aluminum pan industry says, no, you're not getting aluminum pans. Like those are going to aircraft engines until we get this factory fixed. You all got to switch to paper. Well, is that a labeling change? Do we have to change the label because we have tinfoil recycling instructions and now we're going to ship with a paper tray?
Ah,
Do we have to go change all of our labels? Yeah, like that. There's this whole like sort of craziness going on around food, and because most consumers have no idea like what anything actually is, and if a word starts to have more than 5 letters, they assume it's highly processed food and it's going to poison them. So
right.
where you used to kind of be able to have a simple name for something like oil, then it became
Mhm.
vegetable oil, then it became like soybean slash something like the labels are becoming so long and so complicated that what could be perfectly normal for somebody to eat.
Mhm.
And the food marketers have made it worse because then they use the difference of ingredients as a reason why their product is better than somebody else.
Right.
So most consumers are like, you can go on TikTok and find any ingredient you have is bad for you. Like water's bad for you. Like, I mean, like that's just the way marketing works is they could try
Right.
to convince you the other guy's bad. And so if they could just simplify and fix the stupid labeling programs, but so here's an example. If you go into the alcohol section of the grocery store and you like grab eggnog, like with alcohol in it, it'll just say eggnog contains alcohol, cream, and flavoring. Now
Right.
you go around the corner to the eggnog that doesn't have alcohol in it, and it has a very specific ingredient tag, and it's very long and detailed. It has all these stupid like labels and stuff. For some reason, if there's alcohol in it, you don't have to tell anybody what's in it. But around the corner,
Interesting.
right? And that's not, so it's not helping the consumer at all. Um, make useful decisions. And so, especially in the digital world, they like, here's the basic macros and the basic list of ingredients and a QR code. If you want to know the details of which vegetable oil's in it, go online and figure it out. And that's where these digital tools may also help,
Right.
where you can scan it and put in the lock code and see what exactly was in that recipe. It may be able to unlock simple labels again. Well, what is in this Danish? Well, this Danish has, cream cheese. What's in this Danish? Well, this one has low fat cream cheese. Why? Well, the market changed. Right. So we use cream and low fat cream cheese this month, like stuff that wouldn't affect the consumer.
I mean, we see, kind of what you're talking about are there's kind of the traceability side of it, and then there's the transparency side, and that's what I hear you talking about is the conflict between, hey, am I really making the food transparent to the consumer by providing all this super detailed things that kind of obfuscate what it is they're actually eating, at least to them, even though they mean something special inside the insiders, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And then there's the whole like processing aid loophole. The number of foods that you eat that have mineral oil or, flow agents or things like that. And it's not even on the label. There's all sorts of that stuff. So it's like these weird, like there's a lot of products that have more mineral oil or more flow agent or more cornstarch in them than they do a dozen of the things that are on the actual label.
right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
The whole industry is like, that's what you get when government gets too involved. You get people
Yeah.
sitting they just react to what they see and know, and it doesn't match reality at all.
So, hey, Alex, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing your insights on how James Skinner operates and the challenges that you guys are navigating.